we may keep going. It's a casual event where it's all about conversation. It's literally imagined to be like sitting around in a coffee shop with your favorite people talking about your favorite subjects. And that's what I've had the great privilege and honor today to do, to invite guests that really inspire me as an educator. Before we begin, we have two folks from Adobe with us, Sebastian DeStefano and Joe Gray. I wonder if they just want to say a quick hi and hello to anyone they might know out there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Hope you enjoy this. This is definitely casual and informal, more like we're in a coffee shop having a conversation. So I look forward to this conversation with such great people that you have in your chat today, Tom. So welcome, everybody.
Good morning. I'm Jill Gray, and I love the fact that we can have this type of coffee shop conversation this morning, and I'm really looking forward to the second half of the year where I can actually have this coffee shop conversation with some of you face to face. Fingers crossed.
Awesome. I'm going to share my screen and bring up a slide deck of sorts. Today, the topic of our get together is an appropriately or maybe inappropriately long academic sounding title for a cafe setting. It is Critical Digital Literacy, Stories of Community and Social Justice in the Aftermath of 2020. And so the rules of engagement today, you all are pretty familiar with these by this point in Zoom. For security purposes, only the presenters' video and audio feeds are open. Please put thoughtful, constructive questions and responses in the chat pod. This event is now being recorded, so Jill, would you please start the recording? So that means that your whatever name you have associated with your login will be visible in the recording. We will be putting references, resources, and links in the chat pod. Various team members from Adobe will put those resources in there, and then we'll also have a follow-up email for those of you who are attending to make sure that any resources we mentioned are easily accessible by you. I encourage you, if you want to rename yourself with your first name and your last name and your affiliation, if you feel like you'd like to do that, as well as pronoun references like I have done. So welcome to the Adobe Creative Campus Digital Literacy Cafe series. Today, our key words our key term is critical digital literacy. And what we're talking about and thinking about is moving students away from what you might call a functional notion of literacy or digital literacy, which is just maybe purely mechanical, to be able to use their literacy abilities and in our case, literacy tools and instruments to think critically and to make a critical impact on the world around them. So it's a higher order kind of experience, and to very crudely paraphrase Paulo Freire, the idea is that it's not enough for students to be able to just read and write words. They need to be able to read and write the world. And so what me and so many of you have been invested in for a long time now in pedagogies of digital media making is to move students away from being passive, disconnected consumers of other people's content to becoming active, connected creators of their own ideas. And the result of this, the end game, the large outcome, is for them to be empowered, for them to have agency. And those words are sometimes overused, but I think that's really what we're after today, is for students to be agents in their own lives. And so the other key words in the title today are stories of community and social justice. And about 20 years ago, when I started playing around with digital media pedagogies, it became apparent that what I did as a writing instructor and a writing program leader was going to be changing dramatically once all of us had the ability to start making podcasts, making magazines, making posters, making websites, making film. That was going to change dramatically what we do and what it even means to be literate in our world. And so I thought to ourselves, these technologies might be used in ways that aren't so progressive, that serve ends that I don't want to enable. What do I want? What do I want? What change do I want to see? My first instinct was that I wanted students to tell stories that mattered to them, that matter to their lives, to their communities, that matter to our civic spaces. And so we and a couple other people on this call that I've been working with for decades now started pioneering these pedagogies of critical digital literacy, of critical digital literacy, where students were telling just exactly these kinds of stories. It's never potentially been more important to do just exactly that than in the aftermath of 2020. And so if we think about that word math or aftermath, we're all sort of, at least speaking for myself, trying to calculate what to do about the incredibly dramatic experiences we've all had over the last 12 months for a number of reasons we all know. And so for me, as an educator, and for me personally, making something, painting, creating films, making websites has been a way, not just of sort of a personal therapy, but an intellectual process to negotiate and deal and think through these things. And so to enable my students to have the same kind of intellectual processes and thoughts has been very powerful in my experiences. And so that's why we're thinking about defining critical digital literacy today in terms of enabling students to tell stories of community and social justice, particularly focused on reflections regarding the aftermath of the last year. And so we're going to quickly turn it over to our guest today, who are going to help sort of test a hypothesis that I've been working on and asking people about for over 20 years, which is when we started doing this late in the last century, it just seemed like students and instructors naturally gravitated toward this kind of work with a social impact. And so I've always wondered, you don't ever want to be essential. You don't want to say, well, you give someone the ability to make a film or make a podcast, and they're automatically going to do that to promote social justice. But that has certainly been the tendencies that I have seen. And so my hypothesis that I'm interested in our guest speakers sort of testing and talking about from their experiences, when students use digital media in their academic work, they are very likely to do so in ways that try to make the world a better place. Now we know that, again, that's not essential. We have seen this. We can see these very technologies being used to promote injustice. But in an academic setting, it tends not to be that way. And so a corollary to that is that pedagogies that prompt students to create, craft, and share their ideas actively is the best possible way to enable students to think critically, develop their own voices, and empower themselves with agency. And when I wrote that at first, I almost did the academic thing of saying, oh, I need to hedge that a little by saying it's one of the best ways. But then I thought about it and I thought, I don't know a better way to do that than this. And so I'm interested in hearing my friends today reflect on these very issues and these thoughts. And so we're going to ask Jack to take the floor and unmute his microphone and share with us, first of all, give everyone a sense of who you are and in the wonderful institution you work at, and how digital literacy, critical digital literacy, has been realized in the work your students are doing. Jack, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Good morning from rainy, dreary Winston-Salem, North Carolina this morning. I am presently at Winston-Salem State University, a historically Black college and university, one of the 16 schools here in the UNC system. I am an associate professor and program coordinator of justice studies here. So much of what I do has to deal with social justice and exploring, researching, and addressing some of the inequities we see not only here in Winston-Salem and in North Carolina, but of course throughout the country and the globe. Digital literacy is incredibly vital for our students, particularly being that this generation that we all are instructing today, it's a part of their fabric. I mean, it's a part of their DNA. Half the time, some of these young people teach me a thing or two about how to access information or analyze, critically think about certain topics and themes that we study and explore. Here at Winston-Salem State, particularly in the Justice Studies program, I had the privilege of being on a team that was spearheaded by my colleague, Dr. Nation, where we used digital literacy and all of its components to infuse in the curriculum projects, specifically to this wrongfully convicted individual, Ronnie Long. And all you guys can probably Google him. He's all over the internet. Ronnie Long was wrongfully convicted of a crime here in North Carolina 44 years ago. I don't want to tell you how old I was, but let's just say that was most of my life. And nonetheless, we had students using kind of digital literacy to incorporate into their respective projects. And in doing so, we highlighted this injustice here in North Carolina, where students would, create projects. They would, to Todd's earlier point, they would do spoken word. They would analyze some of the trends here in North Carolina as it pertains to wrongful convictions. And students were able to really shine a global light on this individual, on this man. And this past year, August of 2020, students were able to witness this man walk free from prison after all of their valiant efforts these past 6 years or so. So when I look at digital literacy and when I look at how to use your voice to impact social change, they go hand in hand, undoubtedly. And to Todd's point about pedagogical practices and techniques, high impact practices is critical, right? We have to ensure that our young people, our students, are engaged with community members and community activists and researchers. Mind you, it's a little different today because of COVID, but I've been fortunate to have, I teach social justice specifically. I've been fortunate to be able to have community leaders, community organizations engage with my students throughout the semester in collaborative projects where they identify social injustices. They use digital media to present it, to craft it, and then at the end of the semester, they present it to the campus community. And for me, that's no greater reward than seeing young people engage with sometimes people they may not have in other circumstances or environments. So for us, I'd take great pride in that. And I enjoy the collaboration that we have with Adobe. We are the only HBCU that's an Adobe Creative Campus, which is definitely something I appreciate, I value, and I continue to promote the usefulness of this technology with our students and staff, because it's just not students, as I also train faculty as well here at Winston-Salem State. So I'm excited. The 21st century, or 21 rather, will be an interesting year as we continue to promote digital literacy and push it and manifest it in kind of the educational sphere for students. And I look forward to engaging with all of you. Thank you once again. And thank you, Todd, and the Adobe folks for always being supportive and encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And let's just have a little bit of conversation here in sort of self-interested terms. What about my hypothesis? Do you think there is this kind of almost natural or essential link between putting a media production tool that enables a student to circulate their ideas like Adobe Spark or like Premiere Pro or Premiere Rush? What sort of connections do you find between that opportunity for students in general in terms of connecting stories of community and social justice? And then a follow-up to that would be, what about the unique perspective of being in an HBCU in terms of opening up that possibility and affording that opportunity for those students in particular?
So good questions. So to your first point, or question rather, absolutely. What I find is that these students, for me personally, and I'm speaking kind of from my own experiences, initially I was a little bit apprehensive with their ability to kind of use a Spark or a Rush, because these are definitely professional grade tools. But what I found is that these students not only mastered the product, they were able to do so in a manner that was very, very impressive, and they embraced it. It allowed for them to magnify their voice. It allowed for them to take a local project, a local issue, whatever it may be, and magnify it using the production tools that Adobe offered. And for me personally, I do use Adobe Spark pretty regularly. And for my colleagues who are watching, they can get a chuckle out of this. My projects used to be on storyboard. So these students would do this and present it on a storyboard at the end of the semester. Imagine that, wow. And now they're creating this professional grade production that's not only seen by our campus community, but the world once it's posted online. So the world gets to see what our students are doing. To your second point, here at MHB, we're a unique environment. We're a predominantly African-American institution where our students vary from different, socioeconomic levels and backgrounds educationally. And what I found here is that using this product here has really, really empowered our student body to just once again expand and increase their voice. And secondly, be able to use a tool that they may not have gained access to in another environment. I mean, quite frankly, definitely not here in North Carolina. So our students have been using these products consistently for the last 3 or so years, and they've enjoyed it, learned, and it's assisted them in creating their portfolio as they move on to graduate schools or their respective career tracks. So here at an HBCU specifically, these products have allowed for our student body to gain access to information that they may have not under under normal circumstances. And it's been an incredible relationship that we continue to grow year by year, semester by semester.
In EduMax, you and your colleague Wanda White gave a presentation about the digital divide. I wonder if you had any specific points or thoughts about that divide and how the work you're doing is helping to solve that problem.
Absolutely. So what I find is that these students today, because of their understanding of technology and kind of the digital components we have today, they've been able to bridge that divide generationally. For example, in my social justice class, one of the groups is a retirement group, a very prominent retirement group here in the city who does very good things in the city. So they're not as keen on the technology stuff, but the students are. So it has afforded the students an opportunity to teach some of our retirees how to use this information. Then in turn, our retirees kind of convey some historical context as it relates to some of the issues they're addressing. So for me, I feel like that's critical. Now, we still deal with, and this is across the board, where everyone doesn't have access to technology. And we do deal with that here as well. Sadly, we have students who may live in rural parts of the state or other parts of the state where access to technology is very limited. We saw this past year as we went remote full time. But we continue to work hard to ensure that equitable access to technology is attainable for all of our students. Because at the end of the day, this is our future. You and I and some of our more seasoned colleagues, we're going to eventually go on to pasture. And these young people are going to be the ones in education and research and corporate and shaping the world and making good changes for our country.
Awesome. And I'm fascinated by sort of the thought process that instructors have. You come up with a solution to produce a result, and then things change and you go off in another direction. You mentioned earlier storyboards, that before you had access to these digital literacy tools, that you were using storyboards to try to be the final deliverable or to capture the product. And obviously the digital literacy tools enable you to circulate much more easily than a storyboard in a room. I'm interested, do you kind of recall your thought process, how you came to thinking about using storyboards in the first place, as opposed to just writing a paper on a word processor or standing up and giving a speech with note cards? How did you get to that media production and creative mode as an intermediate step to where you are now?
Well, it's not nothing necessarily profound. I was a double major in undergrad, and I was mass communication sociology. So I've always had that radio broadcasting production kind of mindset, on the back burner. So for me, in academia, we can make students write thousands of papers and try to critically analyze phenomenon, whatever they may be. And that could only go so far. The one thing I noticed, particularly with our students, was that they're very creative. And where maybe some may not be as strong writing, some are very strong conveying their message or conveying their information through creative thought and processing. So I was like, how do I capture that? How do I balance the two and capture it? And that was the beginning of, okay, let's work on these presentations. Let's use some sort of creative media, back then storyboarding, so that these students could present, because everyone isn't as strong with writing or maybe, presenting verbally, whatever the case may be. So for me, it was that kind of mindset early on. How do I use these students' gifts? Because they all have gifts. Once we realize as educators, all our students have gifts, it's our obligation and responsibility to hone in and help them kind of, build upon it. Then I was like, oh, that's a no-brainer. So from there, I always incorporated some sort of technology now into all my classes. I just infuse it. Information literacy is critical. Digital technology is paramount in education today. And if we're not incorporating it, so we lose the students. And that's the way you keep them engaged, because they are, once again, that's what they know. Long has come the time where your professor stands in front of the podium and just regurgitates information. Or listen, that's over. If you're doing that still, then you're going to lose a large portion of your student body.
Awesome, Jack. We do have time for a quick question for you, because I know you have to leave early. There's a question in the chat from Amanda, who's asking, and if you could do this real quick, we're going to move on, to just quickly describe some of the topics that you cover in your justice courses.
Sure. So quite simply, I cover all the isms. So, racism, sexism, gender inequality, ageism, ableism. So I cover, we talk about religious intolerance. We cover all the things that you can imagine occur in our society, and we cover them in series. So for instance, in racism, we cover everything from, civil rights to Jim Crow, to stop and frisk, to racial inequalities in the educational system. For religious oppression, we deal with everything you can imagine as it pertains to religious oppression, from Islam, from Christianity, whatever it may be. And what I do is, throughout these lectures, I bring in my professionals in the field to kind of bring real world activities, real world experiences to the classroom, so these students, they can study the theoretical explanations of it, but then they see it in real time. And that helps with them understanding some of these phenomena that are occurring in our society.
Jack, thank you so much for being in our cafe today.
My pleasure.
It's always great talking to you. What's that?
I'm gonna drink some more coffee now.
Please do. Oh, that was amazing. We're going to transition over to Rebecca Ray. And it occurs to me, we think about history, we think about where we were a year ago. I also was thinking about where we were 4 years ago, when we had the Women's March on Washington, right around the inauguration 4 years ago. And we also think about the Me Too movement, which has had such a profound impact. That was on everyone's minds and remains so. When the Black Lives Matter conversation emerged again after the George Floyd murder. And so Rebecca is going to share with us a film she made, a beautiful, elegant, powerful film about the position of women in the world today. Rebecca, welcome. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell everyone where you're from, and then if you'd like to set up the video clip in any way, please do that, and then I'll roll it when you say roll.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So I am currently a first-year PhD student at Clemson's Rhetorics Communication Information Design program. It's a really exciting thing for me in particular. I touch on it in the video that I created. I come from an extremely conservative Christian background. I was taught my entire life that women had two purposes: to be a wife and to be a mother. And there was nothing outside of that. And this was very serious in my family. So my parents did not allow me to go to grad school. And I had to essentially wait until I snuck out of the house in the dead of the night to start this journey for myself. So when I write about these things and we talk about agency, for me, this is not a theoretical concept. Agency is something that I was forbidden to have knowledge of, not just, oh, you don't get to do the thing. No, agency was actually considered sinful in my family. Men could have agency, women could not, children could not. So when I write, when I create, and when I talk about these things as a student right now, and as a graduate teaching assistant, how I'm trying to help my students, it's not about giving agency to someone else. We can't do that. That's not our job. We don't get to do that. It's moving out of the way and letting someone speak, like Jack said so eloquently, with talking about how do you do that with your students. And one of the things that I liked about this video project was that it gets a chance to let me tell a story. And that's one of the things I think about all the time with my students. How do I let them, not let, sorry, bad words. How do I get out of the way to give them that opportunity to say, hey, here's a place for you to creatively express what you do. Or if creativity is not your bag, that's fine. How do you want to tell your story? So I can hear you, so I can listen, because your voice matters so much. And that's what I approach all of this as. Stories matter. And one of the things that we're discussing in Rhetorics right now is this idea of first person narrative. Because in rhetoric, one of our methodologies that we get to choose is cultural. We don't have to be empirical. We don't have to do inductive reasoning. We can tell stories and have it be just as valid, and it should be. And if we're talking about, say, indigenous rhetorics, if you're talking about oral histories, we have for so long in the West, used very broadly here, we have put down the idea of oral storytelling as being as good as the written word, and that's nonsense. Stories are also theories, and they can be just as valid. The evidence can be just as ethical. It can be just as well researched. And one of the things I want to do moving forward in that search for social justice and that search for removing systemic barriers is, how do we make sure that all voices get to be heard? That with very few exceptions, that all stories are valid and necessary, and they help us understand the world and they help us understand each other.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And here's an incredibly powerful example of everything you're talking about. Rebecca, if you'd like to tell people exactly the context in which you made this in the first place.
Sure. So
Yeah.
this was for Dr. Jan Holmvik's information communications course. Basically, he he dropped us in the deep end of Adobe, which was, you had to hit the ground running for this. So in this class, he gave us a series of texts to read and just have an open response to, which was great from a creative point of view. It allowed you to just go wherever the text took you. So for this one, it was about, the title of the book was Making is Connecting. And I had a beautiful cross-pollination with another course where you had to take a text and alter it. So I was rereading Elizabeth Elliot's Passion and Purity, and it's a terrible book. I do not recommend it, but it was one that I had to read growing up because it was about, gender normativity and expectations for men and women. And so when I encountered this opportunity to take a text and alter it, I thought, it'd be great. Why don't I rip this thing apart? And I can use it for both of my courses. I can film the process of me walking through this opportunity to develop my own agency and develop my story. And I used Premiere Pro for this. I shot it all on a Canon Mark something or other. I actually don't know the technical things for it, which is a thing. Your students may not always know the technicalities, but if they can use it, it's okay. But yeah, it was for that class, and it was just a really open-ended way of helping us connect to a text that wasn't just a paper, that wasn't just a seminar presentation. It was a great opportunity, and I'm glad I got to do it.
Anyway, this is a beautiful film in every sense of the word. I'm so pleased to be screening Dollhouse by Rebecca Ray.
Somewhere on a back road in Northwest Washington, my father made me listen to a creaky tape of a woman lecturing other women and girls about their need for sexual purity, modesty, and above all, submission to God, to their fathers, to their husbands. That woman was Elizabeth Elliot, the widow of a man who died while proselytizing the Huaorani tribe in Ecuador. Her husband's story inspired my grandfather to move his entire family to Quito so he could work as a missionary for 4 years. And Elliot's influence continued in my generation. Her frigid morality, emphasis on obedience, and her, frankly, emotionally abusive relationship with her husband was held up to me as an example, a pattern around which my life and future relationship with a spouse should be modeled. Around the same time that I was being taught the gospel according to Elizabeth Elliot, my father decided that I would make a dollhouse with him, since dolls were an appropriate interest for a girl to have. The process of making this dollhouse took weeks and involved less quality time and more lecturing about proper technique, and when it was completed, it was too small for the dolls I already had and loved. But every once in a while, you get an opportunity to rewrite a past experience, to reshape the impact of that experience on your own terms for your own purposes. I decided to make my own damn dollhouse out of cardboard with little planning outside of pure aesthetics. I took a certain pleasure in tearing apart Elliot's self-righteous book, Passion and Purity, to paper my little dollhouse, to change its use from one of shame, obedience, and compliance to that of triumph and a declaration of agency. I wanted to use this dollhouse to express a little of the state of claustrophobia I felt as a child, how my home felt like that dollhouse, too small in every possible way, how it felt to grow up with my future already decided for me, because I had the misfortune to be born a girl. How a too small dollhouse was not just my present, but also my fate, to grow up compliant, to learn to shrink myself, to withhold my opinion, to be a gentle and quiet spirit, pleasing to God and to a potential husband. How the eternal sameness of my homeschooled days would continue into an infantilized womanhood, the boundary of my world ending at my father or my husband's front door. But to have this realized in a temporary, fragile construction of cardboard and glue allows me to use this dollhouse as a metaphor for how hollow and ludicrous those beliefs were revealed to be. Juxtaposed against the porcelain doll, I chose to represent myself. The flames that have burned this house cannot harm her. I wanted to use this little house to demonstrate how, as David Gauntlet says, making things shows us that we are powerful, creative agents. Making things is about transforming one's own sense of self.
And so thank you so much for making that in the first place. Second of all, the last line there, making things is about transforming yourself. What do you think about our hypothesis today?
I think it's accurate. It's about the power of story, right? And I keep hammering that because one of the things that we get to do as educators, as students, as lifelong learners is that we get to tell stories. And I think that's one of the best ways to frame that language, because we all understand it. We all tell stories. Children start telling stories basically as soon as they can babble. And it's a way to say, how do I make sure that in this narrative, I am telling my truth, and I might sometimes get to tell someone else's truth too. And it's a beautiful, magnificent way, again, of moving out of someone's agency and making sure they get that opportunity to do that. And I think you're absolutely right, Todd. It is powerful, and digital tools give us a chance to override some of our classist systems, wherein it's an equalizer, right? You can get on Twitter, whoever you are, and you can speak. And it's really powerful. And it has a lot of responsibility packed into it too, obviously. Thank you, Spider-Man. But that chance to be able to speak in ways that we have not gotten before, frankly, the internet became a thing.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
You know, one of the things, there's so many things I admire about the film, but one of the things that's particularly interesting to me is that it doesn't distinguish between what many people have thought of as the maker movement or the craft movement, that is specifically talking about making things with your hands that are not digital, that are not technological. And here we have both. And I can almost feel the paper, and I can almost smell it burning.
My house reeked for weeks.
and I wonder what your thoughts and experiences might be about that intersection of the tactile making and the digital making or the virtual making.
Well, this is actually really funny. So small confession. I actually have been a technophobe for most of my life because I grew up poor. Like, I didn't have access to technology. I didn't get my first laptop until I was a senior in college. So my whole life up until then was just like, okay, I have these little tiny bits of things. I want to make something out of them. So I would make these elaborate constructions, again, out of paper and glue, whatever I had around the house, to tell stories when I was a kid. And it was actually really exciting to be able to do that again for a class project, and then to film it and create a movie in Premiere is this really fascinating intersection of this thing I've been doing all my life and this brand new technological skill that I was learning with a lot of tears. But it ended up being such a beautiful experience, and that that ability to have that overlap, right? Not have the two separate circles, but have that intersection. It's magnificent. And no matter what you do, whether it's with a tablet and you're just doing pure digital stuff, or if you're doing just pure making something with your own hands, they get to talk to each other, and we don't have to keep them separate, and we shouldn't, I would argue.
Awesome. I was thinking in particular about a educational researcher. Her name is Laura Rendon, and her famous book is Senta Pensante. And she talks about a pedagogy of cajitas, of these small, almost shadow boxes designed to help students on the academic margins successfully connect and engage and find a place that they belong in our university and college settings, where students combine in these boxes elements from their lives along with elements from the course. And if we think about the legacy here, these pedagogies of the making, especially for people who were not in privileged positions, who did not have voice, who were often sent and continue to be sent many messages that they don't belong in higher education. The legacy of this, the history of this goes back decades. There was the Foxfire Appalachian projects. People have been making and telling stories for a long time. Clearly, no, this is a particular moment at the convergence of these technologies being widely available, along with awareness and conversations about social justice at a level that we haven't seen for a long time. And so, I'm wondering, in particular, you've been a teacher now in, I can't remember, was it high school or middle school?
Yeah, I've taught everything from 7th grade English all the way now up through college rhetoric and composition.
And now you're teaching college composition.
Yeah.
What is your perspective of the student experience when prompted or given the ability to craft, to make, to create, especially for students who may be on the academic and socioeconomic margins, ideological margins, like yourself?
Yeah, so I think, again, because of my background of poverty and a lack of access to technology, I've always had a great deal of sympathy and awareness for my students who don't have access. And it's something I kind of talked about in our last interaction, Todd, where when we approach these things, especially right now with most classes being online, we have to make sure as educators, one of our responsibilities is to, as much as possible, offer scaffolding to our students. We have to make sure that they have access to whatever technology they need. And if they don't, what can we offer instead? So for me, when I was teaching, say, theater or English, I had to make sure that if I was requiring a paper, just something simple, I had to make sure that I knew some of my students, one was homeless, and I had to make sure that she had access to the computer lab at school, or I would accept a neatly handwritten paper instead. It didn't matter to me as long as the work was done and the work was done well. And it's something that we can do as instructors, where you can adapt your course. And it's hard if you have a large number of students, but generally speaking, we can ensure that we are removing those systemic barriers, that we are offering the ability that, hey, if all you have is just your rinky-dink iPhone at home, that's okay. Do the best you can with what you have. And if you can't run Premiere on your laptop because your laptop's too old, which some of my classmates had that issue at Clemson this year, what are you offering instead? What are you telling them that their voice still matters, that they can still get a good grade, even if they can't do all the bells and whistles? And I can't emphasize how important that is for both the student experience and the instructor experience. If we are truly trying to use digital literacy as a tool for social justice, we have to offer scaffolding. We have to do whatever we can to remove those barriers for our students. It's hard, but it's so necessary.
It is. It's absolutely essential part of doing all this. And so, we see these high production value, beautiful things made by, very talented students, often who have experience with this. But to me, the most powerful and poignant stories consistently come from the student who's new to being able to share ideas and knowledge in these ways, that this is a real breakthrough for them to be able to tell their stories, autobiographical, as well as the stories of their community, in ways that really make a great impact. And so Thank you so much, Rebecca, for having the courage and the talent to share your story in such a powerful and beautiful and impactful way. I hope you'll stay on the line for a couple more minutes while we transition to my great friend, Dr. Eddie Webb, out in Arizona. Eddie, if you'd unmute your mic and say a few words of hello. I'm going to cue up your film as you say hello to everyone and tell everyone where you work and what it is you do. That the video clip's going to explain in further detail.
Hi everybody, Eddie Webb. I'm here at Mesa Community College in Mesa, Arizona, and just go ahead and roll this, and then we'll talk.
Okay.
The new Media Lab Academy is dedicated to modernizing the written word. Under the leadership of residential faculty member Dr. Eddie Webb, a team of innovative educators came together to create the new Media Lab for our students. The primary purpose of the lab was to modernize the curriculum of language arts and provide students with the instruction they need to be successful in a modern workforce environment. With the success of the new Media Lab experience at Mesa Community College, the district has put forth a plan to scale out to other community colleges across the district. Through providing a welcoming environment for our students to research, write, and produce their own documentaries and podcasts. Through Socratic discourse and academic research, students in the new Media Lab learn about the topics most important to them, ranging from personal identity to issues impacting society as a whole. Students work with each other in a collaborative environment, researching, writing, and peer editing. Through this academic writing, students create the groundwork for their documentaries as they gather relevant archival media as well as produce original media. Students in the lab receive hands-on experience using industry standard equipment such as news gathering and cinema cameras, professional recording equipment, studio lighting and stands, and video editing software. Students are proud of the work they create in the new Media Lab. There's no limit to where their creativity can take them. Now, with the proposed expansion to other colleges in the Maricopa Community Colleges District, students all over the valley will have the opportunity to experience the new Media Lab. The new Media Lab Academy, modernizing the written word.
So, Eddie, amazing story. For those of you who don't know you, why don't you describe what you're doing at Mesa and how the new Media Lab that you pioneered there has grown into so much more for these students in particular?
Well, first, I want to thank the other panelists for sharing their amazing story and energy. It is quite an experience to see this connection that we all have for language itself. And again, I started way back when, in just doing small little projects in the classroom. And I think as Adobe grew with their applications, our abilities to be more sophisticated about how we tell our stories, we sort of grew with them, with Adobe. And but what the work that we do, really, we don't call ourselves storytellers. We call ourselves truth tellers. And so the name of our lab is called A Place of Belonging. And this name and this concept, as a tribal member, we have a lot of elders come through and talk with our students and just be there in the lab and the community. We have our institutes, and it's this idea of having a really healthy and safe place for people coming from the tribal community, other tribal members, young people, to explore what indigenous sovereignty. And so my work, all my dissertation work was around inherent tribal sovereignty. And I worked with my tribe for 4 years, doing a study about what motivates people before and after creating. And what we do are primarily essay documentaries. So, through this process, does it motivate tribal members to want to engage in identity revitalization, whether that's language or spiritual, community, taking tribal membership to a level of, more than just being a tribal member, but being very active. And so that's what my work was, is that does this process that has been so beautifully laid out by our other panelists, does that motivate people to want to engage? Because storytelling, of course, is a foundation of any culture across the globe. But here in the Americas and the tribes, storytelling became a way to archive the history after enduring, 500 years of attempted genocide. And so not only is it the storytelling, but it's the preservation or revitalization of language itself, right? And so in our work, this is what we do. We create this place where people come and can explore these ideas without being worried, about what their teacher may think, or, just to create a place, an environment to create healthy leaders for in the future. So that's what we do, and it's exciting to see other people so tapping into this medium, a tool to regain our humanity and what language was meant for in the first place. So, yeah.
And so we can see that research directly informing your practice.
Yeah.
First as a faculty member, then as a program director, and now as a leader in terms of expanding this pedagogy. And so I'm interested for you to talk a little bit about that. As I understand the story, you started, with one space with a small group of students. And if you would, kind of describe that early success and how your administration and people in your community reacted to that, to now have grown that into a full-blown program, as the video showed, where additional new media labs are being created for just this reason within your system.
Yeah, so I wanted to say that about the it's no longer a hypothesis for me, it's a practice. And I've proven it scientifically, right? That the work that we all do has a significant purpose in people's lives and their motivation to engage in language. But yeah, we just started. I was in film school. When I was in film school, we were still using 16mm Joby cameras, and then you'd have to save all your money and try to get it digitalized somewhere, unless you wanted to cut, tape together and all of that. But I think I purchased one of the first 7D DSLR cameras. And so I just started doing that in my classes with my students. And the very first project we did was Indigenous identity on border towns. So we actually went down to Juarez, Mexico, and did some filming. And we came back and we filmed around town, and we filmed different folks, and we cut that and put it together. And it was amazing to me, but it drew a lot of attention from people at ASU. We had shared it on YouTube and dropped a link here and there. And all of a sudden, we had a president that walked down and said, hey, I'm not exactly sure what you're doing, but keep doing it. And so we started doing it. And then we had an amazing chair, an amazing dean, and a vice president. And they were like, I'm not really sure what you're doing, but let's just keep doing it. What do you need? And right, gave us a little more space and a little more space. And then we put this team together. And I think that's very important for folks to understand. It is a team effort. You know, none of this happens by one person. You know, I even talked to students when they cut that PSA together. I didn't really want to be in it, but they did it anyway. But, you know, it's a team effort. And then Todd, we just, you know, it was amazing that our cabinet asked me to do a presentation. I did that. We actually kind of got a really big space that's now a studio, a production studio. And then the district folks started hearing about what we were doing. We have 10 campuses, over 240,000 students. And, you know, the chancellor at that time took interest in this and gave us an award around, you know, cultural studies. And so then they gave us a little budget to buy some more cameras and lights and stuff. And it just started growing. And then the craziest thing was the city of commerce, the business commerce, the Chamber of Commerce here in the Valley somehow saw some of our work online and gave us this award. So it was the craziest thing. We were named, you know, Teacher of the Year, whatever the thing was, but it was the business community here in Phoenix acknowledged what you would, I guess, consider, you know, humanities arts, liberal arts program, and how important the skill set that the students were learning to tell these stories was in business, right? So there was this weird relationship, and it just kept growing and growing. And that's what we do now. But our primary purpose is, you know, essay documentaries. Now, here's something that's happened for us that I think is real important, is that as tribal members, this idea of always having to push back, and that's what we're getting rid of. It's not always pushing back. It's about being who you are. And these are the stories that we're telling more and more, are authentic stories. It doesn't have to do with always pushing back, because then the focus is on that, right? And so what these labs do is create these environments where you don't have to push back, just tell your story, right? Just be authentic about who you are. And I hope I'm answered your question, but because it's been like a volcano, right? And now as people duplicate it, it took us a while to let go of ownership, you know, and say, okay, you know,
Yeah.
make it your own, you know, do it your own way. You don't have to do it the way we do it. We're currently working with the documentary film school at a different campus, but they do more personal profile stuff. So it's been an amazing journey. And then of course, linking up with you all and Susan, I hope she's on here down at U of A, my colleagues down there. It's just been an amazing journey, you know, to build a community of like-minded people who understand we need to modernize print and, you know, bring it to 2D, 3D levels. Yeah.
And a big point is, we know that's going to happen. Who's going to be at the helm of how that's done in a way that shapes student experience for exactly the right ways and exactly the reasons we've been talking about today. Rebecca, if you'd please unmute and bring your video feed back up. We've got 5 quick minutes to share some thoughts or questions from the audience. You know, you know, Eddie, telling your story, and Rebecca, I bet you've had similar experiences. When I first started doing this as a, you know, an English professor or writing teacher, I thought, I have to keep this really quiet because they're going to run me out of the department for heresy. And exactly the volcano you've been talking about has been the opposite. And it's been in many ways the outside folks, donors, for instance, who've responded so well to the service learning work we've done that have made this thing really connect with so many dots. And so Jack had to leave. I'm very sorry that he had to go. We still have Rebecca and Eddie for just a couple more minutes. Seb, if you have found any questions in the chat pod or come up with any
Just
follow-ups,
really-
I'd love to hear it right now.
Just really wonderful, positive comments about everyone sharing their stories. I'm sure Eddie and Rebecca are reading the comments in there, but so far, no questions. I get inspired every time I hear the stories from Eddie, Rebecca, and Jack. And I know that a lot of our customers get inspired by this. So thank you again for spending the time and sharing your perspective and having this conversation over our virtual coffee shop. And I hope one day that we can do it in person. But there hasn't been any questions, Todd. It's been awesome.
All right, great.
Todd,
Great.
I'd like to make one point of something that Jack said, because I think it's so important as we have moved through this stuff over the years, is when he said, you know, the students know this technology. And that is like the piece we're working on now about going from a teacher to an educator, is it's not about my skill set. These students, this is their world. It's the responsibility of the faculty to let the students take them on this journey. And you don't have to know everything. They're going to teach you as you go. And I just thought that was a great point, because I remember I used to say that a lot. So anyway.
Absolutely. And that's been another part of this experience that's been so encouraging. You know, when I see Rebecca's film, when I see the work that you're doing, it's so different than the things I'm doing. And yet it all has the same value system and the same purpose and the same outcome. But the possibilities are so wide and deep that I'm constantly inspired and amazed by the resourcefulness, the ingenuity, the creativity, and in many cases, the aesthetic beauty, not just of the objects that are made, but the spiritual beauty of that as well. And I'm getting a little melodramatic here, but I feel that really is a big part of this pedagogy, of doing what we're doing to connect and motivate students. Seb, did you come up with a question, or are we ready for a benediction?
Question, and Rebecca answered it. So
great.
Thank you,
Rebecca, last thought for you.
Oh, there is. Hang on. Keep going. Go, Rebecca.
Well, actually, to kind of partially address what Chloe is asking about, trying to convince others to modernize our techniques. I don't know if that's necessarily thinking about it like that. I feel like it posits an unfair binary. It's more, how do we encourage students to tell their stories? Because storytelling is a part of every single industry. I don't care what you're doing. I don't care if you're a stockbroker, you're still telling a story with other people's money. So it's like, how do we get our mindset to move away from this idea of some forms of education being better than others? It's no, how do we encourage students to tell their stories and to tell them with eloquence and grace? And how do we do that for ourselves too as educators? How do we offer that sense of eloquence and grace to our students, to our fellow faculty members? And that's what I keep trying to gel everything about what I'm doing around. How do I offer that to other people and do something better than just, capitalism, work till you die? How do we do that?
Thank you so much.
I would recommend, Chloe, you reach out to every single one of these people on this panelist to continue the conversation about how you can do it. Because what we've learned is that unless you are speaking to each other, you feel like there's no way you can actually change this or convince others or inspire others. These kind of examples and conversations are so important. And who's in the room makes a big, a factor in it moving in a direction that you may or may not feel or hope that it would. A lot of the things that Eddie shared is that it had life of its own after people saw the work that they did. And it was a chain effect where another person and then another person kept seeing the layers and understand what was going on. And eventually it gets to people who want to make it a priority and make change and invest in the change. So my experience has been that without those connecting conversations on your own, it's going to be really hard to do that. So I would encourage you to reach out to our panelists. They are wonderful people and they'd love to talk to people about this. So that's what I would suggest.
And you're welcome to reach out to me as well,ttaylor@adobe.com. I want to thank everyone for being here today and our inspirational guests. Jack had to leave early. Rebecca and Eddie, thank you so much for what you've done. Rebecca set me up perfectly for a segue to our next Adobe Digital Literacy Cafe, which, if I have it right, is March 24th. And the subject there is going to be creativity in STEM. And what Rebecca was just saying about storytelling isn't fiction. It isn't creative writing. It's an essential, in many ways, what Eddie is saying, well, an essential human innate ability and trait to want to tell stories, not just stories, but to tell truths, as Eddie is calling it. And what we're going to do and think about, and then our next cafe, is how we live in an information world, a world where lack of data and information is no longer the problem. It's making sense of all the data and information we have. And in many ways, that's become central to the sciences, is figuring out how to tell a story about data in ways that can have impact and in ways that can make a difference. If we look just at the COVID situation alone, having people understand what all the data mean makes all the difference in our world today. And so we invite you to check back with us and join us for the next Digital Literacy Cafe on March 24th. We are 2 minutes over, and I thank you very much for your time and being with us today. I'll hang out for just a couple of minutes. Eddie,
Great
Rebecca,
time.
thanks again.
Great day.
Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.